The text came at 6:47 in the morning, when the light was barely pushing through the blinds and my body ached in all the old familiar places. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I groaned, thinking it was probably another pharmacy reminder, or one of those endless political messages. But when I picked it up, the words on the screen felt like a knife twisting into me. "Mom, it's better if you stay at Rosewood for now. Emily thinks it's best. We'll visit when we can." I read it once, twice, and then again, hoping maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe my eyes were betraying me. But the meaning was clear. My son, my only son, had just told me that my home was no longer with him, no longer in the house I had poured myself into helping him build, no longer near the grandchildren whose laughter I had thought would be the balm of my old age. Instead, my new address would be Rosewood Senior Living, a polite name for an old age home that smelled of bleach, and loneliness got my chest tightened. I felt as though all the air in the room had been sucked away. I typed back, my fingers trembling, "Danielle, what do you mean? I don't understand. I thought this was temporary." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, appeared again. Then, finally, "It's just easier this way. Mom, please don't make this harder than it is." I sank back against my pillows, the tears stinging before I even realized they were falling. My Daniel, my boy I carried through nights of hunger and days of exhaustion, my boy I had defended against the world, even against his own father. My boy who once clung to me in grocery store aisles, begging for one more box of cereal with the cartoon tiger on the front. That boy had just sent me away like an old coat gone out of style. And the cruelest part was the word he had chosen, easier. Easier for him, for Emily, for their tidy suburban lives with their matching curtains and spotless countertops, easier. To tuck me away behind brick walls and manicured lawns, where my presence wouldn't disturb their dinner parties or complicate their vacations. But as I sat there in my bed, phone clutched in my hand like it was the only rope keeping me tethered to this world, my mind began to wander backward over the decades. Because if he truly believed it was easier, maybe he had forgotten all that came before. Maybe he had chosen to forget. And so I will tell it all, because if no one else remembers, then at least I will. I was born in 1958, in a small Ohio town that barely made it onto the map. My parents were factory people, hardworking, stern, and tired. My father drank his way through most evenings, and my mother carried the silence of a woman who had long ago abandoned the hope of tenderness. From them, I learned 2 things: how to survive without softness, and how to work until my hands went numb. I married young, too young, at 19. His name was Michael. He had a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and a smile that made me believe he would shield me from every storm. He was the kind of boy who kissed you in the church parking lot with reckless passion, and I thought that must mean he loved me enough for a lifetime. But love, I soon discovered, is not passion. It is not reckless kisses or promises whispered into the neck of your wedding dress. Love is patience, work, compromise, and sacrifice. And Michael had no interest in those currencies. He had interest in beer, in card games with his buddies, and in the shape of other women's legs. When I found out I was pregnant at 22, I knew I was on my own, even though he was technically still there. Daniel was born in the dead of winter, when our pipes were frozen and our electricity had been cut off for late bills. I brought him into a world of cold and scarcity, and I swore on the first night he wailed in my arms that he would never know. The kind of neglect I had known, Michael drifted in and out, like a shadow that appeared when it wanted to and vanished when responsibility called. By the time Daniel was 5, he was gone for good. I found myself working double shifts at a diner off Highway 23, pouring coffee for truck drivers and businessmen who never looked me in the eye. I scrubbed grease off plates until my knuckles split, and I carried the smell of burnt bacon in my hair even when I fell asleep. But every dollar I made went toward Daniel. His shoes, his school supplies, the birthday cakes I baked from scratch because I couldn't afford the bakery ones. When other boys teased him for his second-hand clothes, I stayed up at night sewing patches to make them look new. I learned how to stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 meals, how to fix a broken faucet with duct tape, how to smile even when exhaustion pressed like weights against my chest. And Daniel, he was the light that made it all bearable. His laughter was a melody, his small hand in mine the most precious possession I had. One day, "Mom," he would say with those wide, earnest eyes, "I'm gonna buy you a big house with a porch swing, and you won't have to work anymore." I used to kiss the top of his head and whisper, "I don't need a big house, sweetheart. I just need you." There are things I never told him, like the nights I went hungry so he could have seconds at dinner, or the Christmas when I sold my wedding ring worth almost nothing by then so I could buy him the bicycle he had been dreaming of, or the time the landlord threatened eviction, and I begged, humiliated, for 1 more week, while Daniel thought we were just playing camp on the floor with blankets instead of sleeping in beds. When he was 12, I took on a night cleaning job at the local office building. I would come home at 4 a.m., my back screaming, just in time to pack his lunch and see him off to school. I lived on 3 hours of sleep for years, but I told myself it was worth it. It was always worth it. And when he won that scholarship too, Ohio State, my God, the pride I felt could have split the sky open. I cried the whole drive home after dropping him off at the dorms, but they were tears of joy. I thought, we made it. The hard years are behind us. I didn't know then that my sacrifices would fade from his memory like chalk washed away by rain. It was his 2nd year of college when he called me, voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I met someone. Her name's Emily. She's different. You're gonna love her." And I tried. I really did. Emily was all polished smiles and perfect hair, the kind of girl who had grown up in big houses with French windows and mothers who sent them to summer camps. She spoke to me kindly, but with a certain detachment, like I was a charity case she didn't quite know how to handle. When they married, I sat in the 2nd row because Emily's parents took the first, naturally, and I clapped and smiled, even as I felt something tightening in my chest. She looked beautiful, radiant, and Daniel looked happy. That was all I wanted, I told myself. His happiness, but slowly, as years passed, I saw the changes. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. Emily always had reasons: busy schedules, the kids' activities, their home renovations, and I swallowed my hurt because I told myself I didn't want to be a burden. It was after my hip surgery that things shifted for good. I had been living alone in my little rented house in Columbus, stubbornly independent, even as my body betrayed me with age. When I slipped in the kitchen and broke my hip, Daniel and Emily insisted I come stay with them while I recovered. At first, I thought maybe this was the blessing I had been waiting for. I imagined evenings with my grandchildren, family dinners, laughter filling the rooms, but reality was colder. Emily's smile was tight, her patience thinner than paper. She didn't like how slowly I moved, how I sometimes forgot where the sugar was kept, how my presence seemed to rearrange the rhythm of her perfect home. I heard the whispers late at night, through the paper-thin walls. "She's throwing off the whole routine, Daniel. She needs help, just for a while. A while could turn into forever. We can't live like this." And now, this text message. The final stroke. Rosewood. I wiped my tears that morning and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, feeling as though I was dissolving into it. But something inside me at spark I didn't know I still had flickered to life. I whispered aloud, to no one. He doesn't know. He doesn't remember, but I do, and I'll tell it, because this is not just the story of a woman sent away. It is the story of everything before, everything endured, everything given. And maybe, just maybe, it will also be the story of what comes next. The day they brought me to Rosewood was a Tuesday, bright and cruelly cheerful. The sun glared off the car windshield as Daniel drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I sat in the passenger seat, my few belongings packed into 2 suitcases in the back. Emily didn't come. She had an appointment, or so Daniel said. I didn't ask what kind. The silence in the car was thick. I wanted to scream, to beg him to turn around, to remind him of all the nights I sat up with him through fevers, of the pennies I scraped together so he could go on field trips, but my pride, fragile though it was, clamped my mouth shut. Instead, I stared out the window as neighborhoods passed by, children riding bikes, couples tending gardens, lives going on without me. When we pulled into Rosewood Circular Drive, I felt my heart sink. The building was large, brick with white trim, its manicured lawn trimmed to sterile perfection. A banner near the entrance read, "Welcome to Rosewood Senior Living where comfort meets care." It didn't look like comfort to me. It looked like surrender. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, layered over with the cloying sweetness of artificial flowers. The receptionist smiled too brightly, as though trained to reassure families who were riddled with guilt. "Welcome, Mrs. Miller," she said. "We're so glad to have you join our community." Join, as though I had chosen it. Daniel carried my bags down a carpeted hallway, his shoes sinking into the plush floor. My room was small, a twin bed with a floral comforter, a dresser, a knit stand, and a chair by the window. The walls were painted a soft beige, the kind of neutral tone, meant to soothe, but that only made me feel invisible. Daniel set the bags down and cleared his throat. "It's nice, right? You'll have people around. Activities. They'll take good care of you here." I nodded, because my throat had closed tight. "I'll come by this weekend," he added, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe bring the kids." He hugged me awkwardly, as though afraid of breaking something fragile, and then he was gone. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, and then the door clicked shut. That was the moment I realized I had been left behind. Truly left. Over the next few days, I learned the rhythms of Rosewood. Breakfast at 8 o'clock, lunch at noon, dinner at 5 o'clock sharp. Bingo on Wednesdays, Bible study on Fridays, a sing-along every other Sunday. The staff moved like clockwork, smiling, efficient, polite. And then there were the residents. Across the hall lived Margaret, a retired librarian with sharp blue eyes and an even sharper tongue. "You knew," she said the first time she saw me, leaning on her walker. "Don't let the smiles fool you. This place is a waiting room." That's all. In the dining hall, I met Harold, who wore press shirts every day and spoke of his late wife as though she was still in the next room. "I'm just biding my time," he confessed to me once, his fork poised over meatloaf. "Every night I hope I'll see her again in my dreams." There was also Linda, soft-spoken and sweet, who knitted scarves for her grandchildren who never came to visit, and Walter, who insisted on telling the same war stories over and over until we all knew them by heart. We were a collection of castaways, each carrying our own invisible suitcases of regret and memory. Nights were the hardest. I would lie in the narrow bed, listening to the faint hum of the building, the occasional cough or cry from another room. I thought of my old house, the creak of the wooden floors, the smell of my own kitchen, the way the evening light used to spill across the curtains. I thought of Daniel as a boy, crawling into my bed after a nightmare, his small body pressed against mine. I thought of the promises he had made. "I'll take care of you, Mom, always." Now those promises echoed like cruel jokes in the stillness. Sometimes I held my phone in my hand, willing it to light up. Sometimes it did. A brief text from Daniel, "Busy week. Hope you're doing okay." But mostly, it stayed dark. Conversations at Rosewood afternoon. Margaret knocked on my door with her walker. "Come to the lounge," she ordered. "We're playing cards." I followed her reluctantly, and soon found myself at a table with Margaret, Harold, and Linda. "You're quiet," Harold observed. I shrugged. "Just adjusting." Margaret snorted. "Don't bother." "Adjustment is just a polite word for resignation." Linda frowned at her. "Don't scare her off." "It's not all bad here." She turned to me with a gentle smile. "You get used to it. The staff are kind and, well, we have each other." Her words warmed me. But Margaret's rang truer. This place wasn't home. It was a holding pen. Later that night, as we folded up the cards, Margaret leaned close and whispered, "Don't forget who you are. That's how they get you. You start thinking this is all there is, and then you fade." Her words lodged deep inside me, though I didn't yet know what to do with them. 3 weeks in, Daniel finally came with the kids. The moment they walked into my room, my heart leapt. My grandchildren Sophie and Ethan ran to me, their small arms wrapping around my waist. I buried my face in their hair, breathing them in like oxygen. "Grandma, look what I made." Sophie held up a drawing of a house with stick figures smiling in front. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. Daniel stood awkwardly near the door, checking his phone every few minutes. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. I wanted to shout, "No, it's not okay. I don't belong here. I belong with you." But instead, I forced a smile. "I'm managing." Emily didn't come. She had, apparently, another appointment. When they left, I walked them down the hallway, my hand lingering on Sophie's shoulder. As they waved goodbye, I felt the weight of emptiness pressing harder than ever. It was Margaret who saw me unravel one night. I was sitting in the lounge, staring blankly at the muted television. "You're drowning," she said flatly, lowering herself into the chair beside me. I didn't answer. "You think your son betrayed you?" My eyes filled with tears. "He did." Margaret's gaze softened, just slightly. "Then why are you still giving him all your power?" Her words struck me like a slap. I went back to my room and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was tired, her hair thinning, her shoulders slumped. But beneath the wrinkles and weariness, I saw something else, something I'd almost forgotten. Strength. I whispered aloud. "I survived my father. I survived Michael. I raised a child on nothing but grit and hope. I am not done yet." The life-changing inside came not long after Dart. It was a Saturday evening. I had gone to the dining hall for dinner when I overheard two staff members talking by the kitchen. "Her son's paying extra for private care, but he hasn't visited in weeks. Yeah, some of these families just want them out of the way. Shame, really." "She's still sharp as a tack." I froze. They were talking about me. Something inside me snapped, not in despair, but in clarity. I realized I had been waiting. Waiting for Daniel to remember, waiting for Emily to soften, waiting for someone else to decide my worth. But why hadn't I already proven, for decades, that I could carve survival out of stone? Why was I surrendering now? That night, I sat at my small desk and began to write. I wrote everything: the years of sacrifice, the hunger, the late-night shifts, the dreams deferred. I wrote the truth of what it meant to be a mother who gave everything and was repaid with abandonment. And as the words flowed, I felt a new resolve building. This wasn't just a story for me. It was a reckoning. Over the next days, I carried myself differently. Margaret noticed first. "What's changed?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. I remembered who I am. I told her simply. Harold chuckled. "Careful, or they'll think you're plotting an escape." I smiled faintly. Maybe I am, because I wasn't going to fade, not here. Not like this. I didn't know exactly what form it would take yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Daniel and Emily would not write the final chapter of my life. I would. And so, the stage was set for the reckoning. I don't know what came over me that night when I began writing, but once the words started, they wouldn't stop. My pen scratched across page after page of the cheap rosewood stationery until my hand cramped and the ink smudged. It felt less like I was writing and more like something long trapped inside me was clawing its way out, demanding to be seen, to be heard. I wrote about the lean years and the nights of hunger. I wrote about Daniel's first steps, the way his tiny fingers curled around mine like I was the only safe thing in the world. I wrote about Michael walking out the door without a backward glance, and how I vowed then that Daniel would never know abandonment. Most of all, I wrote about the sacrifices no one ever saw. The empty plates I cleared before he woke so he wouldn't notice I hadn't eaten. The way I mended his jeans by candlelight after working 2 shifts. The times I swallowed pride so deep it burned, just to keep a roof over his head. By the time dawn broke, I had a stack of pages that told my life, raw and unvarnished, and I knew what I had to do. The following week, I asked the Rosewood director if they had a printer. She raised an eyebrow, but agreed. I typed everything into a document, my fingers trembling as I relived each memory. When it was done, I titled it simply, For My Son, Who Forgot. I printed 3 copies, one for me, one for Daniel, and one for the world, should it ever need to see. Margaret, sharp-eyed as always, noticed me slipping pages into a large envelope. What's that? She asked. My truth, I said quietly. She smirked. About damn time, the next Saturday, Daniel finally came again, this time alone. Emily had another appointment. I asked him to sit with me in the little garden behind Rosewood, where the roses bloomed perfectly. As though even the flowers here were curated, I handed him the envelope. What's this? He asked. Read it, I said. He frowned but began flipping through. At first his face was blank, the polite mask of someone humoring an elder. Then, as he turned page after page, his expression shifted confusion, discomfort, and finally something close to shame. Mum, he whispered. I leaned forward, my voice steady though my heart thundered. Do you remember any of it, Daniel? Do you remember how I sold my ring to buy you that bicycle? How I went without meals so you could eat? Do you remember the nights I sat awake sewing your clothes because we couldn't afford new ones? Do you? He closed his eyes. I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't want to know, I said. My voice cracked, but I pushed on. And now, because it's easier, you've put me here. Easier for you, easier for Emily. But tell me, Daniel, was it easy for me to raise you alone? Was it easy to survive when your father left? Was it easy to build your future out of my own bones? He bowed his head, his shoulders slumping. I thought this was what you needed. Care, safety. What I needed, I said. My throat tight. Was my son, he tried to explain, fumbling for words. Emily. She was overwhelmed. The kids. We just thought this would help. You seemed so tired after the surgery. I thought maybe I cut him off. You thought maybe I'd fade quietly here, out of sight, so you wouldn't have to face what you owed. Emmy, his eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. No, I said firmly. What's not fair is sacrificing everything for a child and being abandoned in the end. That's what's not fair. We sat in silence, the roses swaying in the breeze, the weight of decades pressing between us. That night, I made my choice. I would not beg him to take me back. I would not cling to scraps of affection. I had lived my entire life bending myself into shapes for others, my parents, Michael, Daniel. No more. The next morning, I went to the Rosewood director. I want to look into independent housing, I told her. She blinked. You mean moving out? Yes, I still have some savings. I still have my social security. I can manage. She hesitated. Most residents come here because they can't. I can, I interrupted, and I will, with Margaret's encouragement. Go on, girl, before this place swallows you whole. I began the process. Within a month, I found a small senior apartment complex downtown. The rent was reasonable, the building safe, and best of all, it was mine. On moving day, Daniel offered to help. I declined. This is something I need to do myself, I said. He looked stricken, but didn't argue. When I unlocked the door to my new apartment, the space was modest. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a balcony overlooking the street. But as I set down my suitcase, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. I stood on the balcony, the city humming below, and whispered, I'm still here. Reclaiming myself. Weeks that followed were like learning to breathe again. I planted herbs in pots on the balcony. I joined a community writing group at the library, where I read pieces of my story aloud and watched strangers nod with tears in their eyes. I even took up painting, something I hadn't done since high school. For the first time in years, I was living for me, not for survival, not for someone else's comfort. But for my own soul, Margaret visited once, her walker clacking across my new floors. "Well, damn," she said, surveying the apartment. "You actually did it," I smiled. "Yes, I did. It was Emily, of all people, who forced the final confrontation. One afternoon, she called me a rarity in itself. Your story," she said curtly, "Daniel showed me. You made me sound like a monster." I took a deep breath. "If the shoe fits, do you have any idea how hard it's been, balancing everything? The kids, the house, Daniel's career, you moving in threw everything off. I was just trying to protect my family by destroying mine." I asked quietly, then I added, with calm steel, "I protected Daniel from hunger, from homelessness, from despair. I gave him every piece of myself. And you couldn't bear a few months of inconvenience. So yes, Emily, you come off as selfish in my story because you were." She sputtered something about different perspectives before hanging up, but I didn't care. For once, I had spoken the truth without softening it. Months later, Daniel came to see me. He stood in the doorway of my apartment, his eyes scanning the plants, the paintings, the stack of notebooks on my desk. "You seem happy," he said. "I am," I replied. He swallowed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try again. I don't want to lose you, Mum." I studied him, the lines on his face, the weariness in his eyes. He was no longer the boy I had raised, but he was still my son. "You already lost me once," I said gently. "But maybe we can build something new. On my terms this time," he nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. The epilogue. "My own terms, no. When I sit on my balcony in the evenings, the city glowing beneath me, I feel something like peace. Daniel visits more often now, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. The conversations are tentative, fragile, but honest. He knows I will never return to Rosewood. He knows I will never again accept being hidden away for his convenience, because I have remembered who I am. I am the girl who survived a loveless childhood. I am the woman who endured betrayal. I am the mother who built a life from scraps, who carried her son on her back through storms he never even saw. And now, I am the woman who reclaimed her own story. If there is one lesson in all of this, it is this: love should never mean erasure. Sacrifice should not be met with abandonment. And when the world forgets you, you must remember yourself. So yes, my son left me in an old age home at the insistence of his wife. But that is not where my story ends. That is where it began again. And this time, I am the author.